Continuing here in week 2 of American National Government, we're going to begin on slide number 33, talking about the ratification strategy. So the Constitution of the U.S. was completed, and it was signed by the delegates on September 17th of 1787. But they made the decision that in order for this to be adopted, we're not going to punt it to the Congress to make the decision for the American people. We're going to let the American people, through their state ratifying conventions, make the decision. In other words, if this is going to be binding on all of us, remember the phrase from the Declaration of Independence: government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. Okay, so in order for this to be the law of the land, there's got to be consent for all of the American people. Okay, and there was about 3 million of them back then. Okay, through these state ratifying conventions. Okay, and so realize that Congress had not authorized a complete restructuring of the federal government. In authorizing the Philadelphia Convention, Congress had stated that any proposed change in the Articles of Confederation would have to be agreed to in Congress and then confirmed by all the states. Okay, the delegates of the Constitution ignored Congress because, remember, Congress was highly dysfunctional under the Articles, and they established their own ratification. Okay, they bypassed Congress, and they said, listen, if this is ever going to fly, the people have got to make this decision. If the people don't buy in, it's not going to be worth the paper it's printed on. Okay, so the Constitution was submitted to the states, where it would become law if approved by at least 9 states in special ratifying conventions of popularly elected delegates. North Carolina and Rhode Island opposed the Union and only ratified the Constitution after 11 states ratified. Okay, sorry here, I'm fixing my iPad. And so you had a debate between two groups of people, okay? Those that wanted the Constitution were called the Federalists, and those that took a look at the Constitution, read it, and were like, oh my gosh, there's so much more power to this federal government than we had before. We don't want to go the way of the monarchy. We got some big issues, okay? The group that opposed it were called the Anti-Federalists, okay? And they claimed, if you look at slide number 34, they claimed that the national government would be too powerful and would threaten self-government in the separate states and the liberty of the people, okay? And so they saw a parallel between this newly created government that was so strong and the distant national government and the British king, okay? So if you go to slide number 35, you see some of the specific issues with the Constitution, okay? They had an issue because there was no Bill of Rights in the original Constitution, okay? Did the absence of the Bill of Rights indicate that the central government would be free to define for itself the people's rights, okay? In other words, if you understand the Declaration of Independence, government secures your pre-existing natural rights. That's how they understood it, okay? The Anti-Federalists were like, gosh, if government starts defining what rights we do have and what we don't have, we're kind of in trouble, okay? Anti-Federalists saw the central government controlled by political elites. The Anti-Federalists admired state governments for having legislatures in which the members were not greatly different in wealth from the voters who elected them. In other words, they were very concerned that the people in Washington would be elites. They would have a lot more money than everyone else. They would see the world differently than everyone else, okay? What you'll find is some of these arguments that the Anti-Federalists had are some of the arguments that people have today about the government in Washington today. Very interesting, the parallels, okay? They were concerned that election districts would be so large that ordinary people would not have much contact with their representatives and vice versa. Consider the fact that there are some districts in the United States where there is one representative for 700,000 people, okay? How much of a voice do you think you have? Okay, they were concerned that Congress would become the national aristocracy of the country. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true today, but kind of interesting argument, okay? Go to slide number 36, you see some of the other issues. Given that there was no chief executive in the Articles, they worried that the president would become a monarch or some form of an imperial presidency, okay? Is that an argument today? Yeah, it is. Motives of the framers came into question. They were concerned that the framers were wealthy and highly educated, that they favored elites over those that were in debt. the thought of paying national taxes was not appealing. Okay, under the new system of government, taxes were mandatory. It's not voluntary. You have to pay national taxes. Okay, try saying no to the IRS. Anti-federalists acknowledged the need for more economic cooperation between the states and stronger common defense, so they did concede that that was a good thing. They opposed the creation of a strong national government as the mechanism, seeing that the revision of the articles would be the solution. Okay, so again, in general, they thought that they thought it was big government all over again. Okay, if you go to slide number 37, those that were for the Constitution were called the Federalists. Okay, they were the supporters of it. Okay, individuals like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. Okay, these were individuals that drafted the Constitution and or wrote the Federalist Papers, which were a series of newspaper articles written by Jay, Hamilton, and Madison, trying to show the reason why the Constitution is what it is, trying the justification for the different articles and why they set it up. Okay, so they published these articles in a New York City newspaper under the name Publius. Okay. So what were the Federalist arguments? If you go to slide number 38. Madison and Hamilton argued that the government of the Constitution would correct the defects of the articles. They would have the power necessary to forge a secure and prosperous nation. Because of the restrictions on its powers, the new government would endanger neither the states nor liberty. So they thought that, listen, we've already embedded all kinds of limitations throughout the Constitution. You don't have to worry about your liberty being trampled. Okay? In Federalist 57, 48, 49, 50, 51, Madison explained how the separation of national institutions empowered and restricted the federal government. Okay, so again, there were two contending arguments for the Constitution as they went to these ratification, debates and things of that nature. Okay, slide number 39. What's the significance of the Constitution? It gave the world a new model of government, which was written down in writing. Okay, get it in writing. They did that. In which a written document defined the government's lawful powers, and it represented a higher authority over any political leader or institution. Okay, politicians come and politicians go, but constitutions are meant to remain. Okay, and that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to limit, the ability of the American people to constantly have whiplash. Okay, America swings left, and then America swings right. There's this idea that in the midst of the swinging and the going of back and forth, and that's typically what the nation has done throughout its creation, is you've got a constitution that is fixed and firm and holds politicians and the Americans to account to what was agreed back in 1788 and 1789. Okay, so what were some of the framers' goals? If you go to slide number 40. First of all, to establish a government strong enough to meet the nation's needs, an objective sought through substantial grants of power to the federal government in defense and commerce. In other words, you need to have a government strong enough to defend you against external attack. But you also need government to kind of create a level playing field so that commerce and trade can take place within the nation, where one state or one group is not favored over another, and it's all fair. Okay. Number two, to establish a government that would not threaten the existence of the separate states. You don't want the national government to get stronger than the states. Okay, and they did that through something called federalism. It's the diffusion of power vertically from national government to the state and local governments. Okay. Three, to establish a government that would not threaten liberty. Okay, through the checks and balances, people have freedom. Okay, and number four, to establish a government based on popular consent. An objective sought through the provisions of direct and indirect elections of public officials. In other words, when elections become suspended, you no longer have government by consent, right? Is that you have government by fiat. The idea that government, governors, presidents, legislators, they're making decisions, and the people cannot hold their feet to the fire through elections. Okay, so that's what they were trying to do. Okay, if you go to slide number 41, again, the idea of the Constitution protects our liberty by limiting government. Okay, they want a government acting decisively but not irresponsibly. So the end of government is supposed to be liberty, a principle that individuals should be free to act and think as they choose, providing that they do not infringe unreasonably upon the freedom and well-being of others, the freedom to do what you ought. What is the government's threat to liberty? Okay, it can legally arrest, imprison, or even kill those that violate its directives. Okay, is that a threat to liberty? Yeah. But there's something we'll talk about a little bit later called due process, that in order for the government to take your life or to take your liberty and arrest you, it must follow due process, right? Lawful authority, followed honoring the Bill of Rights, okay, things like that must take place before your liberty's taken away. That's our system of government, okay? Another goal of government is justice. And what is just? What is fair and reasonable, okay? Ensuring that the rights of all U.S. citizens are granted equal protection under the rule of law. That's that principle of equality that Jefferson advocated. He drew that from John Locke, that we still try to advocate in our system of government today. Okay, so I'm going to end there and I'll continue with slide number 42.